This is the TD Fitness Podcast with Coach T, episode number 50.
Welcome to the TD Fitness Podcast, giving you ways to live a healthy lifestyle without giving up the things that make life worth living. And now your host, certified health coach and personal trainer, Coach T.
Hey guys, welcome back to TD Fitness. This is episode number 50. Become the person you want to be. This is an important episode for a couple of reasons. Number one, I think the topic is extremely important, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But number two, this is somewhat of a turning point in the TD Fitness podcast. We are changing up the focus of the podcast just a bit. So now at episode number 50, we've got 49 episodes behind us. I've talked about fitness. I've talked about nutrition. I've talked about trainer advice and thrown some coaching principles in there. Some of the things that I think are enduring and some of the things that I feel like will just help you live your best life and be your healthiest self. But as I think about that, I feel like there is more that I can do, okay? I feel like you can get data just about anywhere. I mean, there are a number of resources, a number of individuals, a number of different platforms that offer advice on what to do and how to do it when it comes to exercise, when it comes to proper nutrition or nutrition that's right for you, I should say, and when it comes to the mindset involved with all of that. But I want to offer more insight and more perspective. You know, when I took probably the most demanding job I had in the military, a good friend of mine gave me some advice that I remember to this day. And he said, T, do the things that only you can do. And as I think about that, it really involves two parts, right? There's, number one, not doing the things that others can and should do. But then there's also doing the things that others cannot do, either because they don't have the access that you have or don't have the bandwidth or maybe not even the expertise. I feel like there are a lot of people, again, a lot of resources out there that have a lot of expertise, a lot of experience, and maybe bigger platforms to be able to provide health, fitness, and nutrition advice. And I'm still going to do that to an extent, but I want to expand what it is that I do and do something that only I can do, and that is provide more of my perspective. So I feel like the best way to differentiate what this podcast is about and what TD Fitness is about and how it's different than others is to do what I love and to do what my gut tells me. And that is providing advice for healthy living. Now, you may think that's not much different than what you've been doing. Well, I want to explain a little bit about what I mean by healthy living. So you may have heard me talk about how I made the switch from being a personal trainer years ago to expanding my scope to becoming a health coach. I realized that it's not just about exercise with a little bit of diet thrown in. It's about all of those things, but even more so about the mental aspect and the psychological aspect of what it takes to change your behaviors. And that's really what's at the crux of becoming a health coach and coaching someone through healthy living. But now I also realize that health and fitness is way more than physical. It's more than just exercise, more than just diet, and it's even more than just the mental aspect. One of the things that an organization that I've been part of for most of my military career, one of the things that they focus on is what's called resilience. And that is essentially, how can you be your best self? When you think about how to create or how to make sure individuals are prepared to do what it is that you've asked them to do. And they break it down into different categories, different domains. There's four different domains, four different categories that I'll talk about. And this is really going to be the backdrop for how we proceed going forward with the podcast. The first is the body, right? The second is mental health. The next is spiritual health, or spiritual well-being. And then finally, if you want to think about the social or community or family aspect of that, of those things, that is what I want to expand to. I want to hit all four of those categories because I think that there are some things that can be applied to all of those things. Now, as a trainer and a coach, obviously, physical fitness is something that is important to me and something that I feel like is important to relay to you. That's kind of the body, the human aspect of it, the things that you do to make sure that you are physically capable and taking care of yourself. And I provide this aspect or this category through workout plans, through the Fit Life program, actually, by providing weekly workouts that you can do just about anywhere. The Fit Life program also starts with the mental wellness aspect of it. When you think about the mind, the psychological component, being in a good place mentally, right? So we have the physical fitness aspect, we have the mental wellness aspect, and then let's talk about a little bit about the social and family balance, that aspect of it. You all know that is something that is very important to me. I talk about my family quite a bit because that's really important to me, in the sense of community. When you think about your support system and those things that are necessary and required and really help you to move along, whether it's your health and fitness journey, whether it's any other kind of journey or goal that you have set in your life. And then finally, the spiritual awareness aspect of it. That is absolutely a foundational element in my life. You probably know I make reference to my beliefs from time to time, and something that I feel very strongly about. Now, I understand that different people have different beliefs, and that's good. There's nothing wrong with that. What I'm telling you is that it's important to have some type of spiritual aspect in your life, and I hope to provide some of the principles that not only apply to that domain, that category, but also the social and family, the mental wellness aspect, and the physical fitness component. I feel like those four things combined really equals a life of performance if you have all four of those categories firing on all cylinders, right? If you're not too deficient in any one or delinquent in any one, because one of those, being deficient in one of those categories or not being in a comfortable place in one of those categories can really bring you down and bring the other categories down as well. And before you know it, you're spiraling into a pool of negativity, and that is absolutely what we want to avoid. So how do you live a life of performance? I would like to give you what I consider performance truths that you can apply to many different aspects of your life, primarily these four categories. So these performance truths, I would call them maybe time-tested principles, because my goal is to help you see that principles are what we need to learn and adopt, because they can be applied across different domains and different facets of our lives. But more importantly, it's the principles that endure. Okay, we're not talking about short-term gains. We're talking about lifelong principles, lifelong practices. That's what we're striving towards. So no matter what the latest diet is, what the latest workout craze is, what the latest life hack is, the things that endure from generation to generation, that's these performance truths, these time-tested principles. And the concepts aren't new, but sometimes we fail to realize that they can be applied elsewhere, or we may need help in how to apply them. So, what does all this mean? And what does it mean for this episode in particular? I thought a lot about what I wanted this kind of pivot episode to be about. And I went back to the basics. If you think back to the very first TD Fitness Podcast episode number 1001, I talked about how your daily habits ultimately determine the lifestyle that you lead. So this performance truth for this episode is this: seemingly small things add up to create the person you are or want to be. I want you to remember that. Let me say it again. Seemingly small things add up to create the person you are or the person you want to be. So let's think about that from the fitness standpoint. Category number 1, habits. Just about every episode that I've done so far on the TD Fitness Podcast refers to this concept in some form or another. One way that I've talked about that in the past is by discussing what it is that I do daily, my daily routine, because I've gotten questions on that from time to time, and I feel like it's important to show you not just some of the successes that I have, but some of the challenges that I have as well. But generally speaking, some of the things that I do from day to day, things that really, when you think about habits and implementing habits, these are things that 9 times out of 10 I am practicing, and I don't think about them. So the first thing I do when I wake up is I roll over, kiss my wife, because I'm usually the first one to get up in the morning. I get out of bed then, and I'll go and check on the girls to make sure they're sleeping soundly, tuck them in if their covers have come off. Then I'll come back into the bedroom, into the bathroom, and I'll drink a 16-ounce bottle of water because I start the hydration process or rehydration process then, very first thing in the morning. Then I'll get cleaned up, I'll come out, I'll do my devotional. Then as the day goes on, I'm fasting until lunch, at least 5 days a week. I'm drinking water throughout the day. I try to get 100 ounces in daily. I'll typically try to have a plant-based meal for lunch, so like a big salad or some fruit or something like that. I try to exercise regularly. But all of these things, these habits that I have now, I didn't start doing those things at once, not all of them at once. They were each added incrementally over time. Seth Godin said, "A small thing repeated is not a small thing." So let's move on to the mental aspect of this. Again, we're talking about seemingly small things and how they add up to create the person you are or the person you want to be. When I look at this from a mental wellness standpoint, I think about reducing the number of small stressors you have one by one. Just try to knock them out. Reduce that stress. I recently listened to a sermon by our pastor at church, and the topic was stress. And he said that stress is the number 1 mental health problem for women in the United States, and it's number 2 for men behind alcohol and drugs. Those are some pretty staggering statistics. Another thing he said was that the average child today has an anxiety level the same as a psychiatric patient from the 1950s. And there are so many things behind this statement, right? It talks to how things are so much more stressful now, how much more our kids and the younger generation has to deal with than we had to deal with growing up, right? But it also talks about how your belief precedes your behavior, because the things that you believe can contribute to stress. It's been said that stress can be defined as the gap between our expectation and reality. So the bigger the gap, the more stress you have. So if you expect nothing and accept everything, then your stress goes away, right? Well, that's easier said than done. But really, it's an example of how the battle of stress is primarily in your mind. It's a mental thing. So when you think about rolling with some of these things that come your way instead of stressing over them, that's one way that you can counter that. So I like to think about reducing the number of small stressors in our lives, because again, they add up. When we talk about how small things add up to equal big results, those small stressors, they add up to a lot of stress. And a lot of stress in our lives is obviously not good. Seth Godin, another quote from Seth Godin. He says, without a doubt, it's long-term, consistent, and persistent effort that makes real change happen. Systemic change is a process, not an event. You're not going to de-stress overnight, right? You have to incrementally and consistently work to reduce the level of stress in your life. Reduce those small things that seem insignificant, but actually add up to create a pile of stress. So if you want to reduce stress and get to a better place mentally, remember, long-term, consistent, and persistent effort is key. As I think about the family or the social aspect, the community aspect of this, I'm reminded of a story that I heard recently, and really a situation that I was in recently. So not too long ago, just a couple of weeks ago, we were part of a small group at church. This group that meets after the sermon to talk about various things. And there was an individual there, a gentleman who had recently lost his wife. And actually, they had been either divorced or separated for a number of years prior to her taking ill and eventually passing. And although they were not married when she passed, they had become close, throughout the latter part of her life. And as my wife and I kind of shared our story, we are marriage mentors at our church. We do premarital mentoring for couples. And we were talking about some of the things that we do in our marriage just to try to, again, maintain a strong foundation for not just for ourselves, but for our relationship, for our family, and for our children. And one of the things that this gentleman brought up was something that I had not really thought of in this way, but he said that growing apart is insidious. So he mentioned how one day you walk out of the house and maybe you don't kiss your wife because you're upset with her. And before you know it, it's 2 days. And before you know it, it's over a week. And before you know it, it's much longer than that. Those types of things add up over time, right? The things you do repeatedly, not your intentions, but your actions, they are going to define the type of person you are with respect to those who are close to you in your life, right? They define the type of father you are. They define the type of husband you are. They define how you're viewed as a friend. They define the son or the daughter you are, or the brother or sister you are. It's actions, not intentions. When you think, I'll just apologize later, or I'll make time for them at the end of the week, or I'll make it up to her on her birthday next month, or I'll call him later, it's fine. Again, actions, not intentions, right? Actions define the type of person you are. So don't wait. Success is the sum of small efforts repeated day in and day out. That was a quote said by Robert J. Collier, who was a writer. So if you want success in your relationships, you have to put in the small efforts consistently. And finally, the spiritual aspect of this. So it's interesting to me that I've heard two separate church sermons at different times in my life in different locations, states apart, right? That talk about the same thing. So the first is what inspired, again, kind of this topic in the very first podcast topic for TD Fitness, and that was the fact that behavior leads to habits and habits lead to lifestyle. I heard that at our church in Alabama. Well, when we moved here, not too long ago, there was a sermon at our current church, and what I remember about that sermon was that the pastor said, if you sow a thought, you reap an action. If you sow an action, you reap a habit. sow a habit and reap a character, sow a character and reap a destiny. Now, if you're not familiar with the terms sow and reap, it comes from, I think, farming vernacular. So basically, if you plant something, then you're going to later reap the rewards of that. So if you plant thoughts, then you will reap actions. Plant actions, you will reap habits. Plant habits, you will reap character. And if you plant character, then you will reap a destiny, right? So that's kind of the same message that I got from both of those sermons. And I think it's important. Aristotle said, we are what we repeatedly do. Excellence, then, is not a destination, but a habit. So when it comes to the spiritual aspect of your life, remember that the things you do day in and day out are ultimately going to determine the type of person that you are. So going back to our very first question, the topic of this podcast, I should say, seemingly small things add up to create the person you are or the person you want to be. So when you ask, how do I become the person that I want to be? Well, again, seemingly small things, those things add up. So that's what you have to address. Address those things to ultimately become the person that you want to be. All right, guys, thanks so much for tuning in again. This is episode number 50. So you can find the show notes for this episode at tdfitness.net/050. That's episode number 50. I hope that you can relate to this newer format, because really these four categories of our lives and being healthy in all four of those categories is what will help you to become a more comfortable person, healthier person overall. And it's really something to think about. So I just wanted to provide, again, principles that can be applied through all four of those domains. And hopefully you find them useful as well. Thanks so much for tuning in. You have a blessed one. Coach T, out. Why did I create the Fit Life program? I wanted to provide something that wasn't just for weight loss, not just for feeling better, not even just for better health. I wanted a more complete solution. And I also wanted to make it sustainable. It's not just about starting something or sticking with it for a month or two. Healthy living, which includes fitness, nutrition, and a healthy mindset, is about practicing healthy habits consistently. Not all the time, because no one is perfect, but practicing those healthy habits more than you are right now. That's how change begins, and that's how healthy living continues. Find out more at fitlifeprogram.com or tdfitness.net/fitlife.